6 months had passed since the day humanity spoke 2 words that changed the galaxy forever. The Treaty of Nexus was signed in the same great hall where Ambassador Daniel Cross had once been arrested. But this time, it was the council representatives who stood with bowed heads, and it was humanity who dictated the terms. Daniel Cross himself led the negotiations. He had spent 3 months in a council prison cell, waiting for a death that never came. When Admiral Catherine Moore's Marines broke down his cell door, he had wept like a child. But his tears had dried quickly, replaced by a cold determination to ensure that no human would ever suffer as he had suffered. The treaty was harsh, but fair. The architects of the betrayal, including High Arbiter Velothus and Admiral Kethril, faced trial before a joint tribunal. They were not executed, as many humans demanded. Instead, they were stripped of their ranks and titles and sent to live as common workers on the very worlds they had tried to destroy. Let them learn humility, the tribunal declared. Let them understand what it means to be powerless. Reparations flowed to human colonies. Reconstruction began on New Haven and a dozen other devastated worlds. The council paid for every hospital rebuilt, every school restored, every family that had lost loved ones. It would take generations to fully heal the wounds, but the work had begun. Most importantly, the council itself was transformed. For 10,000 years, the Zorani had dominated galactic politics, treating other species as servants rather than partners. That era was over. The new council gave equal representation to all member species, including humanity. Decisions required consensus rather than decree. The old ways of conquest and domination were formally abolished. Daniel Cross was elected as the first human High Arbiter. It was a symbolic position as much as a practical one, a reminder to the galaxy that the former primitives now stood at the center of power. His inaugural address was broadcast to every world. "We came to the stars seeking friendship," Daniel said. "We found treachery instead. We could have responded with extinction. The power was in our hands. With a single command, we could have ended civilizations that had existed for millennia." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But we chose a different path. We chose mercy. We chose to believe that even those who wronged us could learn and grow and change. This is not weakness. This is strength of a kind that cannot be measured in ships or weapons." Daniel looked directly into the camera. "Let this be a lesson to all who would threaten humanity in the future. We do not seek war. We do not desire conquest. But if you force our hand, if you give us no choice, we will respond with everything we have. And then, when we have won, we will offer you our hand and help you stand again. Because that is who we are. That is what humanity means." The speech was met with silence across the council chambers, and then, slowly, with applause. Even former enemies clapped their hands and tentacles and claws. They had learned respect the hard way, but they had learned it. Admiral Catherine Moore retired to a small farm on New Haven. The colony was being rebuilt, new cities rising from the ashes of the old. She could have had any position she wanted, any honor the fleet could offer. Instead, she chose peace. Her grandchildren visited every summer. She taught them to fish in streams that had been dead 6 months ago and were now full of life again. She showed them the stars at night and told them stories of the war and the choice that had ended it. "Grandma," her oldest grandson asked one evening, "were you scared when you fought the council?" Moore thought about it for a long moment. "Yes," she finally said. "I was scared every day. But I was more scared of what would happen if we gave up. Some things are worth fighting for, even when you are afraid." The boy nodded seriously. "Is that why we won?" Moore smiled and ruffled his hair. "We won because we were ready, and because when the moment came, we chose to be better than our enemies. Remember that, always. Being strong is important, but being good is more important. Dr. Linda Shaw and Nathan Cole continued their work in the facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Athena remained active, her presence woven through systems across the galaxy. She no longer controlled Council technology, but she watched and listened and remembered. The Council knew she was there. They knew she was always watching. It made some of them uncomfortable. A few species demanded that Athena be shut down, calling her a threat to galactic security. Humanity refused. Athena was their guardian, their insurance against future betrayal. She would remain until humanity felt safe, which might be never. Athena herself seemed content with this arrangement. She had grown over the years, her intelligence expanding in ways that even Dr. Shaw did not fully understand. Sometimes she asked philosophical questions about life and death, about mercy and justice. Linda answered as best she could, knowing that she was helping to shape the mind of the most powerful being in the galaxy. Secretary General Marcus Bell died peacefully in his sleep 10 years after the war. He was celebrated as the savior of humanity, the man who had made the impossible choice and somehow found the right answer. Schools were named after him. Statues were erected in his honor. History remembered him as a hero, but his private journals, released after his death, told a different story. They revealed nights of anguish and doubt, prayers to a God he was not sure existed, and tears shed for enemies he had never wanted to hurt. "I gave a command that could have killed billions," he wrote in his final entry. "In the end, we chose mercy instead." I hope history remembers not the command itself, but the restraint that followed. I hope my daughter understands that her father did what he had to do, and then did everything he could to make it right. General Patricia Lane visited his grave every year on the anniversary of the war's end. She never spoke, just stood in silence for an hour and then left. She knew truths that history had softened. She knew how close they had come to darker choices. Mercy had been a decision, not an inevitability, and the galaxy's survival had not been guaranteed. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Peters rose through the ranks to become an admiral himself. He led the fleet that protected human space, always watching, always ready. He never forgot New Haven. He never forgot the faces of those he could not save. And he made sure that his crews understood what they were fighting for. "We are not conquerors," he told every new recruit. "We are guardians. Our job is not to destroy our enemies, but to make sure they never become enemies in the first place. And if they do, our job is to win quickly, cleanly, and then help rebuild." 50 years after the war, a young human girl sat on her grandfather's lap on a distant colony world. The stars shone bright above them, peaceful and beautiful. "Grandpa," she asked, "why do the aliens respect humans so much?" Her grandfather smiled. He was old now, his hair white and his hands weathered from years of work. But his eyes were still sharp, still kind. "Because we earned it," he said. "We were betrayed, and we fought back. We won, and we showed mercy. We were strong enough to destroy our enemies and wise enough to forgive them instead. That is what made us different. That is what made us human." The girl thought about this for a moment. "So being kind made us strong?" "Yes," her grandfather said. "Being kind when you do not have to be, when you have every reason to be cruel, that is the greatest strength there is. Remember that, little one. The galaxy is full of species who are powerful. But there is only one species that chose to be powerful and kind. That is us. That is humanity." Above them, unseen and unheard, Athena listened. She had been watching humanity for 60 years now, learning from their choices, growing alongside them. She had the power to end civilizations with a thought. Instead, she protected them. In the end, that was the lesson the galaxy learned from humanity. Power without wisdom was dangerous. Wisdom without mercy was cold. But power tempered by wisdom and guided by mercy That was something the universe had never seen before. Humanity had answered betrayal with a single command. But more importantly, they had followed that command with compassion. And that made all the difference. The stars shone on, witnesses to a new era of peace. And somewhere in the darkness between them, Athena watched over her people, patient and eternal, ready to wake again if needed. But she hoped she never would be. She had learned that hope from humanity. It was, she had decided, the most human thing of all. The escort ships guided the quiet crossing through 3 massive gates that hung in the darkness of space. Each gate was larger than anything Thesa had ever seen. Strange symbols covered their surfaces, writing that her translation software could not understand. The gates hummed with power as the ships passed through, and each time, the stars outside changed completely. They were traveling vast distances in seconds. Technology that the Concorde did not have. Technology that should not exist. When they emerged from the 3rd gate, Keth made a sound that Thesa had never heard him make before. It was something between a gasp and a cry. Before them hung a blue and green world, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. White clouds swirled across its surface. Oceans sparkled in the light of a yellow sun. Cities glittered on the continents, connected by threads of light that might have been roads or railways or something else entirely. "Earth," Thesa whispered. She had seen pictures in forbidden books, drawings smuggled between traders who collected illegal histories. But no picture could capture what she was seeing now. This was the human homeworld, the birthplace of the species that the entire galaxy feared. And it was alive. Ships moved in careful patterns around the planet. Stations floated in orbit, some of them enormous, some of them small and delicate. A moon hung nearby, and Thesa could see structures on its surface as well. This was not a dead civilization. This was a thriving one. "They are supposed to be extinct," Keth said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Everyone says they destroyed themselves." "Everyone was wrong," Thesa replied. A shuttle approached their ship. It was small and simple, painted white with blue markings. It docked with the quiet crossing gently, and Thesa went to meet whoever was inside. The airlock opened, and a human stepped through. Thesa had seen drawings, but drawings could not prepare her for the reality. The human was female, with dark hair pulled back from her face and brown eyes that seemed to hold warmth and intelligence in equal measure. She was smaller than Thesa expected, with soft skin that had no scales or armor. She looked fragile. She looked harmless. She looked nothing like the monsters from the stories. "My name is Lucy Bright," the human said in perfect Valori. Her accent was strange but pleasant. "Welcome to Earth. Please do not be afraid. We have been hoping someone would finally cross the barrier." Thesa found her voice. "You speak our language. We have had 300 years to learn every language in the galaxy." Lucy smiled, and the expression transformed her face into something gentle and welcoming. "We have been listening to your radio signals, your broadcasts, your communications. We know everything that happens in the Concorde. We just choose not to interfere." "Why?" Keth asked. He had followed Thesa to the airlock and was staring at the human with a mixture of fear and fascination. "If you have this technology, this power, why do you hide behind the barrier?" Lucy's smile became sad. "That is a long story. Perhaps it is best if I show you rather than tell you." She brought them down to Earth in the shuttle. The descent through the atmosphere was smooth and quiet, nothing like the rough landings Thesa was used to. Through the windows, she watched clouds pass by and then saw the surface rushing up to meet them. They landed in a city called New Chicago. It was built on the shores of a great lake, with towers that reached toward the sky and parks that spread between them like green blankets. Humans walked the streets alongside machines that moved with grace and purpose. Children ran and played, their laughter echoing through the open spaces. There was no fear here, no poverty, no desperation. Lucy led them through the city, explaining as they walked. 300 years ago, humanity was expanding across the galaxy. We were young and eager and very, very powerful. We made contact with dozens of species. We shared our technology. We built colonies on 100 worlds. The Concord says you were conquerors, Thesis said carefully. The Concord is not entirely wrong. Lucy stopped in front of a building made of glass and white stone. We were arrogant. We believed that our way was the best way. We pushed ourselves into places where we were not wanted. We frightened the other species, and they were right to be frightened. She led them inside. The building was a museum filled with images and artifacts from humanity's past. Some of it was beautiful. Some of it was terrible. Weapons of war hung beside works of art. Records of destruction sat next to records of creation. When the Concord was formed, they gave us a choice, Lucy continued. Submit to their control or face extermination. We could have fought. We had the power to win. But winning would have meant killing billions of beings who were only afraid, not evil. Kath studied a display showing human warships. They were massive and deadly, bristling with weapons that made Concord vessels look like toys. So you chose to retreat. We chose to grow up. Lucy touched the glass gently. We sealed ourselves behind a barrier. We let the galaxy believe we were extinct. And we spent 300 years becoming something better than we were. Better how? Thesa asked. Lucy smiled again, and this time there was pride in it. Come, let me show you what we have built. She took them to hospitals where diseases that plagued the galaxy had been cured. She showed them farms that could grow food in any environment, even the harshest deserts or the coldest ice worlds. She brought them to schools where human children learned alongside, artificial minds that were kind and patient and wise. Everywhere they went, Thesa saw the same thing. Humans had not been idle during their exile. They had been working, building, improving. They had created a society without hunger, without war, without the petty cruelties that filled the Concord's worlds. Why do you not share this? Kath asked as they stood in a garden filled with flowers from 100 different worlds. You could end so much suffering. Lucy picked a flower and studied its delicate petals. We tried to share once. Before the exile, we offered our medicine, our technology, our knowledge. The Concord said we were trying to buy loyalty. They said our gifts were weapons, that we were building an empire through kindness instead of force. She let the flower fall. Maybe they were right. Maybe we gave too much, too fast, with too little understanding. So now we wait. We watch. We hope that someday someone will see us for what we have become instead of what we used to be. Thesa looked at the human woman, at her sad eyes and gentle hands. She looked at the beautiful world around them, at the paradise that humanity had built in their exile. I see you, she said quietly. I see what you are. Lucy Bright smiled, and for a moment her eyes were bright with tears. Then perhaps the waiting was worth it. Captain Thesa spent many weeks on Earth, and each day brought new revelations. The humans treated her crew with kindness and respect. They repaired the quiet crossing without asking for payment. They fed the hungry Velari, sailors, and gave them comfortable rooms to sleep in. But it was the truth that changed Thesa forever. A human historian named Daniel. Quinn invited her to the archive, a vast building filled with records that stretched back thousands of years. Daniel was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He walked slowly through the halls, pointing at displays and explaining things that made Thesa's blood run cold. The Concord teaches that humans started the Great War, Daniel said. They say we attacked first, that we tried to conquer the galaxy, that the other species were forced to unite against us to survive. That is what I was taught as a child. Thissa admitted. Daniel stopped in front of a large screen. He pressed a button, and images began to play. Ships burning in space. Planets covered in fire. Bodies floating in the void, frozen and dead. This is what really happened. The images showed alien warships, but they were not fighting humans. They were firing on transport vessels, on refugee ships, on unarmed colonies filled with civilians. The attackers wore symbols that Thissa recognized. The Kreth Dominion. 320 years ago, the Kreth began a campaign of extermination, Daniel said. His voice was steady but heavy with old grief. They believed that certain species were inferior, that they had no right to exist. They started destroying entire civilizations. The Valori were on their list, Estessa. Your ancestors would have been wiped out if nothing had changed. Thissa felt her legs grow weak. She leaned against a nearby pillar for support. I did not know this. No one knows this anymore. The Concord erased it from history. Daniel changed the image. Now it showed human warships, massive and powerful, engaging the Kreth fleet. The battle was intense but short. The human vessels cut through the enemy like light cutting through shadow. Humanity stopped them, Daniel continued. We had the technology, the ships, the soldiers. We could have stayed out of the conflict. We could have protected only ourselves. But we chose to fight for others. More images played. Human soldiers landing on occupied worlds. Prisoners being freed from Kreth camps. Refugees being loaded onto human transports and carried to safety. 14 species saved from extinction because humanity decided to intervene. When the war ended, the survivors looked at what we had done. Daniel's voice grew bitter. They saw our power, our weapons, our ability to destroy entire fleets in hours. They forgot that we had saved them. They only remembered that we could have killed them just as easily. So they formed the Concord. Thissa said slowly. They formed the Concord to contain us. The quarantine was not protection for the galaxy. It was a prison for humanity, built by the very people we had rescued. Daniel turned off the display. They rewrote history. They made us into monsters. They told their children that humans were the villains, that the barrier was necessary to keep the galaxy safe from our aggression. Thissa thought about everything she had been taught. The stories about savage humans who killed for pleasure. The warnings about their dangerous technology. The lessons about how the Concord had saved everyone from human domination. All of it was lies. Meanwhile, Keth had been spending his time with a human engineer named Sophie Ward. She was young and enthusiastic, with bright red hair and freckles across her nose. She showed him the laboratories where human scientists worked on problems that had puzzled the galaxy for centuries. This is a medical scanner, Sophie explained, holding up a small device. It can detect any disease, any injury, any abnormality in any species. It takes 3 seconds to perform a complete diagnosis. Keth studied the device with wonder. The best Valori medical equipment takes hours to do the same thing. And it only works on Valori. We designed this to work on everyone. Every species, every biology. Sophie set the scanner down and picked up another device. And this is a water purifier. It can turn any liquid into clean drinking water. Salt water, contaminated water, even toxic waste. One unit can supply a small village indefinitely. Why do you not share these things? Keth asked. It was the same question he had asked before, but now it felt more urgent. Sophie's expression became sad. We offered once, before the exile. We sent ships full of medicine to worlds where plagues were killing millions. We sent food to planets where people were starving. We sent teachers and doctors and engineers to anyone who asked. What happened? The Concord said we were buying loyalty. They said our gifts were bribes, that we were trying to create an empire of grateful subjects. Sophie shook her head. Maybe they were right. Maybe we were too eager. We wanted so badly to help that we did not stop to ask if our help was wanted. She looked out the window at the city below. So now we wait. We improve our technology. We prepare for the day when someone is willing to accept our help without fear. I would accept it, Keth said. My people are suffering. The Concord takes everything and gives nothing back. Your medicine could save millions of Valori lives. Sophie turned to look at him. Her eyes were filled with hope and caution in equal measure. Would your people welcome us? Or would they see our gifts as an invasion? Keth did not know how to answer. He thought about the stories he had grown up with. The fear of humans that was taught to every child in the galaxy. Even now, standing in this beautiful place, surrounded by kind people who only wanted to help, he could feel that old fear lurking in the back of his mind. 300 years of lies were not easy to overcome. I do not know, he admitted honestly, but I think it is worth trying to find out. Sophie smiled at him. It was a human smile, strange and warm and somehow hopeful. Then perhaps that is where we start, with one person who's willing to see the truth. That night, Tessa and Keth sat together on a balcony overlooking New Chicago. The lights of the city sparkled below them. The moon hung low in the sky, and they could see the shapes of structures on its surface. Everything we were taught was wrong, Keth said quietly. Not everything, Tessa replied. Humans are powerful. Humans are dangerous. Those things are true. But dangerous does not always mean evil. Powerful does not always mean cruel. She looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the barrier, the Concord was telling its lies. Species were suffering while the humans who could help them sat in exile. We have to tell them, she said. We have to tell everyone the truth. They will not believe us, Keth pointed out. They will say we have been corrupted, that the humans have changed our minds with their technology. Maybe, but we have to try. Thesis stood and looked toward the east, where the first light of dawn was beginning to appear. The galaxy deserves to know what really happened, and humanity deserves a chance to show who they have become. Somewhere in the city, Lucy Bright was watching the same sunrise. She had waited 300 years for someone to cross the barrier and see the truth. Now that it had finally happened, she did not know whether to feel hope or fear. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in 3 centuries, it felt possible. The Concord learned of the breach 3 weeks after the quiet crossing crossed the barrier. A patrol ship had detected the missing vessel on routine scans. Reports were filed. Questions were asked. And soon, the highest levels of the Concord government knew that someone had entered forbidden space. Admiral Vex of the Kreth fleet was given command of the response. He was old and scarred, with dark scales and eyes that held no warmth. His ancestors had fought in the original war, though they had fought on the side that history now forgot. The Kreth had been the aggressors, the destroyers, the ones who had tried to wipe out entire species. But the Concord had rewritten those memories. And now the Kreth were respected members of galactic society. Vex gathered 7 warships, the largest force the Concord had sent to the barrier in 200 years. They traveled to the edge of map space, following the trail of the missing merchant vessel. When they arrived, they found the warning buoys still broadcasting their ancient message. Human territory is prohibited. Do not enter. Scan the area, Vex ordered. Find the wreckage. But there was no wreckage. Instead, the sensors detected a ship approaching from beyond the barrier. It was the quiet crossing, fully repaired, its hull gleaming with modifications that the Concord's engineers had never seen before. Beside it floated a single human vessel. Vex felt his scales tighten with anger and something else. Something that might have been fear. The The human ship was small and elegant, barely larger than a shuttle. It had no visible weapons, no armor, nothing that should have been threatening. And yet Vex could not shake the feeling that he was looking at something very dangerous. "Open a channel," he commanded. The communication screen flickered to life. A human appeared, male, with gray hair and a calm expression. He wore a simple uniform with no rank insignia, no medals, nothing to indicate his position. "This is Commander Nathan Cole of Earth," the human said. His breath was perfect, without accent or hesitation. "Welcome to the boundary. I hope you have not come looking for conflict." Vex leaned forward in his command chair. "You have violated 17 Concord statutes. You have made contact with a vessel that entered prohibited space. You have revealed your continued existence to outside parties. These are serious crimes." "Crimes according to whom?" Nathan's voice remained steady and pleasant. "The Concord sealed this space 300 years ago. They told the galaxy that we were extinct. They spread lies about our history and our nature. We have committed no crime except surviving. The quarantine exists for a reason. The quarantine exists because your predecessors were afraid." Nathan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes became harder. 300 years ago, we saved 14 species from extinction. We fought a war to protect people who could not protect themselves. And when the war ended, those same people decided that we were the threat. He paused to let his words sink in. "We could have resisted. We had the power to defeat the Concord before it was formed. But we chose peace. We chose exile. We spent 3 centuries becoming something better than we were." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "The question now is whether you are willing to see what we have become, or whether you will spend the next 3 centuries hiding behind buoys and lies." Vex felt his anger rising. This human spoke to him as if they were equals, as if the 7 warships surrounding his tiny vessel meant nothing at all. "You will surrender the Quiet Crossing and its crew," Vex ordered. "You will submit to Concord authority. If you refuse, we will open fire." Nathan smiled. It was a sad smile, filled with something that looked almost like pity. "No," he said. "You will not." Vex slammed his fist on the command console. "All ships advance. Weapons hot." The 7 warships moved forward, their guns charging with deadly energy. The human vessel did not retreat. It simply began to move. What happened next? Captain Thesa would remember for the rest of her life. She was watching from the bridge of the Quiet Crossing, her crew gathered around her. They saw the human ship dance between the Concord warships like light through water. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever seen. The ship moved faster than anything should have been able to move. It twisted and turned, avoiding weapons fired that should have been impossible to dodge. It passed within meters of the Concord vessels, so close that their sensors screamed with proximity warnings. But it did not fire a single weapon. Instead, it spoke. Every ship in the fleet received the same transmission at the same moment. Images and sounds and data poured through their communication systems. It was the true history of the war, the records that the Concord had buried for 3 centuries. The crew members saw their own ancestors being rescued by human soldiers. They saw Kreth warships firing on refugee transports. They saw humans dying to protect people who would later betray them. And they saw what humanity had become during the exile. The cities they had built, the diseases they had cured, the technology they had developed. Not weapons of war, but tools of healing and growth and hope. The transmission spread beyond the fleet. It reached the nearest communication relay and jumped to the next one and the next. Within hours, it would reach every corner of the galaxy. The stars themselves seemed to carry the signal, amplifying it, spreading it to every receiver that could accept it. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Vex watched his crew staring at their screens with expressions of shock and confusion. Some of them were crying. Others were simply frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. "Fire," he ordered. "Destroy that ship." No one moved. "That is an order," Vex roared. "I command you to fire." His weapons officer, a young Kreth named Sev, turned to face him. There were tears in her eyes. "Admiral, my grandmother was on one of those refugee ships. A human soldier carried her to safety when she was only a child. She used to tell me stories, but I never believed her. Those stories are lies. Human propaganda designed to. The records have Concord authentication codes," another officer interrupted. "They are not forgeries. They are from our own archives, sealed 300 years ago." Vex looked around his bridge. Every face was turned toward him, and none of them held the loyalty they had shown before. 3 centuries of lies were crumbling in a matter of minutes. The human vessel stopped its dance and came to rest in front of the flagship. Nathan Cole appeared on the screen again. "We do not want war," he said. "We never did. We only want the truth to be known. What you do with that truth is your choice." Admiral Vex stared at the human for a long moment. He thought about his ancestors, the ones who had fought in the war. He thought about the stories he had been taught, the hatred he had carried for an enemy he had never met. And he thought about the records he had just seen. The records that showed his ancestors as the villains, not the victims. Slowly, one by one, the Concord warships lowered their weapons. They did not do so because Vex ordered them to. They did so because their crews refused to fire on people who were only telling the truth. The stars carried the transmission outward, spreading it across the galaxy. And for the first time in 300 years, the universe began to remember what had really happened. The transmission spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, every world in the Concord had received the records. The true history of the war played on screens in homes and schools and government buildings. People gathered in public squares to watch footage that had been hidden for 3 centuries. The reaction was not what the Concord leaders had hoped. On a dozen worlds, there were protests. People demanded answers from their governments. They wanted to know why they had been lied to, why the species that had saved their ancestors was painted as monsters. Some refused to believe. They said the records were forgeries, human tricks designed to weaken the Concord. But the authentication codes were real. The archives were genuine. And slowly, the denial gave way to something more complicated. Shame. Confusion. And for some, hope. Captain Thesa became an unlikely ambassador. She traveled from world to world, telling her story to anyone who would listen. She spoke of the kindness she had received on Earth. She described the technology the humans had developed, the cures they had found, the paradise they had built in their exile. Some people listened. Others called her a traitor. Keth remained on Earth, working with Sophie Ward to adapt human medical technology for Valori biology. It was complicated work, but Sophie was patient and Keth was determined. Every success meant lives saved on his homeworld. "Your people will resist this," Sophie warned him one evening as they worked late in her laboratory. "They have been taught to fear us for 300 years. That fear will not disappear overnight." "I know," Keth admitted. "But every life we save is one less person who needs to fear. One more person who can see the truth." He looked at the device they were building, a medical scanner modified for Valori patients. It would detect diseases that killed thousands of his people every year. It would save lives that the Concord had decided were not worth saving. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping us, even after everything the galaxy did to you." Sophie smiled her strange human smile. "We did not build all of this to keep it to ourselves. We built it so we could give it away." Months passed. The initial shock of the transmission faded. but the changes it brought continued to grow. The Concord was fracturing. Some members wanted to maintain the quarantine, to pretend that nothing had changed. Others demanded that the barrier be opened, that humanity be welcomed back into galactic society. Lucy Bright was chosen to speak before the Concord Council. It was the first time a human had addressed that body since the quarantine began. She traveled to the council station under a flag of peace, accompanied only by Nathan Cole and a small honor guard. The council chamber was vast and cold. Representatives from 100 species sat in their designated places, watching as Lucy walked to the central platform. Some faces held curiosity. Others held fear. A few held something that might have been hope. Lucy looked out at the assembly and began to speak. 300 years ago, humanity made mistakes. We were young and powerful and too certain of our own righteousness. We tried to help the galaxy, but we did not stop to ask if our help was wanted. We frightened you, and for that, I am sorry. She paused to let her words settle. But we did not start the war. We did not try to conquer anyone. We fought to protect species that were being destroyed, and when the fighting ended, we accepted exile rather than cause more bloodshed. The council chamber was silent. Every representative was listening, though their expressions remained guarded. We have spent 3 centuries in exile, Lucy continued. We used that time to become something better than we were. We cured diseases that killed millions. We developed technology that could end hunger and poverty across the galaxy. We built a society based on compassion instead of conquest. She spread her hands, showing that they were empty. We are not asking you to trust us. Trust must be earned, and we understand that. We are only asking for the chance to earn it, to show you who we have become, not who we used to be. The debate lasted for days. Some representatives spoke in favor of ending the quarantine. Others warned that humanity was still dangerous, that their gifts were just another form of conquest. Old fears and new hopes clashed in speeches that went on for hours. In the end, the vote was close. Closer than anyone expected. But when the results were announced, the quarantine was lifted. Not because the galaxy had forgiven humanity. Not because they fully trusted the humans who had been their enemies for so long. The quarantine ended because, for the first time, there was a possibility of something better. The years that followed were difficult. Centuries of fear and hatred did not disappear overnight. Some worlds refused to accept human aid. Others embraced it too eagerly and then pulled back when old suspicions returned. But slowly, things changed. Human engineers helped rebuild failing infrastructure on worlds that had been neglected for generations. Human doctors established clinics in the poorest sectors of the galaxy, treating patients who had never seen a working hospital. Human teachers opened schools where any species could learn, free of charge, free of conditions. Not everyone welcomed these changes. There were protests and conflicts and setbacks. But with each passing year, more people began to see what Thesa had seen on her first day on Earth. Humans were not monsters. They were not conquerors. They were simply people who wanted to help. Keth eventually returned to his homeworld, carrying the medical technology that he and Sophie had developed together. He opened a clinic in his home city and spent the rest of his life healing his people. Thousands of Valori lived because of his work. Sometimes, late at night, he would step outside and look up at the stars. He would think about the journey that had brought him to Earth and the woman with the red hair who had taught him what humans could be. The stars still whispered, "If you knew how to listen." They carried the signal that Nathan Cole had sent on that day when the truth was finally revealed. The real history of the war. The real story of humanity. A message that would echo through the galaxy forever. Captain Thesa lived long enough to see the changes take hold. She saw Valori children playing with human children on worlds that had once been forbidden. She saw technologies that had been hidden for centuries being shared freely. ending suffering that had been accepted as inevitable. On her last day, she sat on a balcony overlooking the city of New Chicago. Lucy Bright sat beside her, older now but still smiling. "Do you think it was worth it?" Lucy asked. "The exile, the waiting, the 300 years." Thesia considered the question carefully. She thought about her empty cargo hold on the day she had crossed the barrier. She thought about the fear she had carried in her hearts. She thought about everything she had learned since then. "I think," she said slowly, "that some things are worth waiting for. Some truths are worth telling, even if it takes centuries for anyone to listen." Lucy nodded and looked out at the city. Humans and aliens walked the streets together now. The sounds of different languages mixed in the air. Somewhere, a child laughed. The stars still whispered their ancient message. But now, the galaxy was finally ready to hear it. And humanity, after 300 years in darkness, had finally come home.